either I went to foster care or I went to Ghana.
That one night would have changed your whole life.
They didn't get rich by owning the business, they got rich by selling. Secondaries are the secret. A lot of tech founders wouldn't tell you about how they got rich.
That is just cash out the back door, straight into the founder's pocket.
Just so you build in a very, very hot space. Joker, VCs, and you just said, yo, so raise it, and then next round, oh, you know what, I want to focus on the long-term vision and feed my family, even though you don't have any fucking family, right? I've sat with bankers and just like understood this. It's not a game of like you say something and then you trick the buyer. No, it's not some kind of I trick you by saying this but really is not the truth. There's this girl, she sold a company to JP Morgan, 75 million. Turns out all the numbers in terms of what she sold was just fake. Now she's in jail. I'm not really good at anything and I'm not really bad at anything. I can just, with enough effort and focus, I can design to be good at it. It's like me giving you £10 and then you giving me like 20 quid and saying, do you want to do it again? I'm like, well, yeah, okay, there you go. Like, just, you know what I mean?
It literally is them buying free money.
Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I actually have a video on my phone of the money handle and I'm just like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I recorded it, I think subconsciously, to make sure that I knew it was real.
Third thought is, wow, I'm only protected up to £80,000 in Santander.
Yeah. I only knew about that after I started talking to my wealth managers and they said, yo, move the account somewhere else. Like, ain't no fucking way. Millions in the account, and I'm calling them like, hey, can you move it?
And now you invest in avocados. And we are back. And this podcast is going to absolutely send it for you and your business on every single level. I've got the man here, Tim Armoo, who founded Fan Bytes and sold it for multiple 8 figures. My man, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It should be fun.
Mate, this is good because we sat down, must have been about, 6 to 8 weeks ago at a mastermind in Dubai.
Yeah.
And when you were speaking about your experiences in business, there was a few things that you've done essentially throughout it that I thought were fantastic, because you designed your business from the jump to be able to be sold, and you engineered who you were selling it to and everything like that. And I'd love to dive into that story later on in the podcast, but where I want to take it back to start, to give people a bit of a context as to who you are and what Fan Bytes do. Obviously, let's take them back to where you started. Obviously, growing up in Old Kent Road and trying to get off the estate and all that kind of thing.
The end, yes. I grew up in the end, Southeast London, Old Kent Road. I grew up on a 4th floor council estate. I was born in Hackney, Homerton Hospital, weirdly enough. And then I went to live in Ghana for 10 years. And the reason I went to live in Ghana was quite straightforward. It was basically either I went to foster care or I went to Ghana, because my parents didn't see eye to eye. I was basically an unplanned child. So my mom was a British citizen. My dad was not. So when they got married, it was basically like a passport marriage, right? So that he could get the British citizenship. I wasn't particularly expected. And so when I then came through, they're like, oh, well, what do we do with this one? And then my grandmother had come to London and said, do you know what, rather than going to foster care, you can come back to Ghana with me.
So she literally took you in at 10 years old?
No, literally like 6 months old.
6 months old.
I stayed in Ghana until I was 10 and I came back here in year 6.
What was the thought process in you coming back here at 10 years old?
2 things. My mum, God bless her, was actually behind this, because she said, so a son has to be with their parent, and more importantly, a son has to be with their dad, because she'd actually seen a lot of stats online which said that kids who don't grow up with a father figure end up being more inclined to go to prison, drugs, violence, etc. So the logic was basically it was time for me to go back to my parents, but then the second part of it was important for me to live with my dad rather than my mum, because of the data around people who don't have father figures.
Yeah, I love that. I love that she's like literally checked that out, and she's kind of like divorced herself from, because as a mother, you'd have an ego to want to keep the child. You know what I mean? So she's had to divorce herself from that ego to allow you to go and view your dad. Yeah.
It's interesting, right? Because as I've grown up and I've met other people who perhaps are second generation immigrants where, you know, their parents have come here looking for a better life. She was right. I have noticed a bit of a trend, which is when, especially black men, or I guess non-white men, when they live with their mum, there tends to be then that they try and be the father figure, and to them, a father figure involves a lot of protection, and the way that they show that is by perhaps, finding different ways to make money for the family, which end up in drugs or blah, 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 or gambling, blah, blah. So in hindsight, it was one of those life inflection points, which, now I'm 29, which 19 years on, I can go, wow, if that hadn't happened, life could have been quite different.
I've got some good friends that are Kenyan, and what I've found with the African families is they're really strict on the education and wanting their children to go and be like either musicians or doctors and this, that, and the other. What were your family trying to push you towards?
So I think about this a lot, and none of my parents actually pushed me to do anything, any particular profession. I think they just thought, just do well, right? So actually, a lot of the career development I've had have been self-imposed. So at one point I wanted to become a journalist. At one point I did want to become a lawyer. At one point I wanted to become a behavioral economist. Like, all of these are basically things that I thought would be interesting to do. I think the general undertone was just do well in life, and however you do it, it doesn't matter, you just go do it.
As long as it's not drugs, gang
stuff. Yeah.
And all the other stuff that happens on these estates.
Yeah.
Because obviously you're brought up on an estate, right?
Yeah.
So you saw a lot of your friends getting in trouble?
Oh, man. Not only in trouble, but then I saw a lot of people who just did not have the required, how shall we say, strong will to not get in trouble. So I remember once, this was around 14, 15. I remember we went to school, because I went to a school in the end called City of London Academy. And I remember someone was like, yo, did you see what happened to Orlando? I'm like, what? What happened? And basically that morning, Orlando had gone to the McDonald's on Oaken Road, and the Peckham boys had basically found him and stabbed him, right? And like a month afterwards, he came back and, he had this massive slice on there. But it was such a natural part of the way that we lived. And what was most interesting was, similar people to Orlando, similar people to him should not have been in the lifestyle. But it was almost their way of conforming. It was their way of finding a community. And I was actually in danger of doing this. There's a story I tell, which is that at some point, a gangster saved my life, basically. At some point, I was like chilling with a man them, because I thought, you know what? I want to be with this community so that I'm safe, so that when I'm coming back at bloody 7 p.m. in December, when it's very dark from school, I can basically be protected. And I remember once the group was in a house and they were preparing to go to Peckham to ride out. So for those who don't know what riding out means, it literally means, it's such a fucking crazy concept. It's literally people meet, to get pumped up, get amped up, and then go to the enemy's block to stab someone. That's what like riding out means. So often Fridays and Sundays you have ride outs, which would literally be guys meet together, get on bikes, in cars, go to the other side and ride out, i.e. get someone, or take videos of them in their area and be like, we were here, you weren't here. And I remember a specific one. It was a Sunday ride out, and everyone's amped up and they're getting ready to go. And a guy called Mike's actually went to my school, but he was also one of the leaders of the gang. He just like took me to a corner and said, yo, this ain't for you, bro. And I remember thinking, nah, yeah, it is, right? And he said, no, this ain't for you. And it's because he went to the same school as me. He knew I was a smart, intellectual person. I had started a few businesses before, because this was when I was 15. So I started a tutoring business that he got to know about at 14. And it was interesting that him just saying that was almost as if someone opened up my mind and just went, yo, why the fuck are you pretending? Like, this is not for you. You don't want to do this. You're only doing this because it's to make you feel safe. But when push comes to shove, you're not really going to do anything. So you have way better things. And there's almost this, there's this very funny thing, and I don't know if you've ever felt this actually. where like people like Rio Ferdinand and Raheem Sterling, right? In the end, if typically you were seen as a good footballer, you were left relatively untouched because it was like the way you're going to make it out of the hood was by being a footballer and making it out. And then when you make it out, you'll, I guess, support the hood, right? And it was this weird thing where you had like known murderers look at someone and say, do you know what? He's going to make it out. So let's protect him from being like me because I know that my life is not that great. And in my case, it wasn't football. It was just like business and intellect. And people saw that and they just kept me safe throughout the whole thing.
That's crazy, mate. Because like when you think about, I often look at my life and how divine intervention has played a part in keeping me out of certain problems in my life. And it just seemed like even when you were speaking that out, I just felt like that was divine intervention because something, universe, God was looking after you right then. Because at the end of the day, like that one night would have changed your whole life. Everything. Like we wouldn't be talking about an 8-figure exit. We wouldn't be talking about all the stuff we're going to go into in this podcast if you had just took, because you could have gone on that ride out and you could have just, to try and prove yourself, stab someone for no fucking reason. And then next thing you know, your whole life's just changed. But you're doing a 10-year stretch. It's mental, mate. Absolutely mental.
So many people I've met have done similar. Like people who were good at football, people who were good at, I remember a specific guy really good at music, and everyone just figured he would just make it out through music. He felt the compulsion to prove himself, do the ride out, stab someone. And I think, he had like 12 years.
And this is something in London that's still happening every day here. Like this is part of the culture. What part of that do you think? Because obviously, look, it's a very, how do I say this without being in the wrong context? It's very, the black lads are the ones doing it, aren't they? A lot of the time, like it's in your culture. Why is it in the culture?
So I have a friend, and I debate this with him a lot. I definitely think rap music has been to blame for a lot of this. And he's like, no, it just reflects the lifestyle. I'm like, brother, when people were getting amped up to go to your side to kill people, they play rap music. Right? Yeah. They play, they play gigs. Yeah. And they're like, yo, let's get ready. How can you say this doesn't lead to this? So I think rap culture definitely has to do with it. And quite frankly, earlier I talked about father figures. I genuinely do believe that
lack of father figures
and lack of this understanding that there is a different way to live your life, which is not just directed by other people. So rap, father figures, and just a lack of awareness as to there being an alternative way to live. When you add those three things, this is the reason why people say they're product of their environment. And I say, but that's just fucking bullshit, because you're not. Like, you can decide to not be. But if you add all those three things, people then immediately believe they are.
Yeah, I think the most beautiful thing about it is that someone who was in that environment decided that it wasn't right for you to be a part of that environment. And actually freed you from a life that would have just caused you an immense amount of pain. And not only that, caused your family an immense amount of pain. Especially, I reckon, your mum. Because you think about how much pain your mum went through, knowing that even though she wanted to keep her son near her, he needed to go see his dad. That's a lot of pain for a woman to deal with. I think.
Know. Yeah, my mum, I mean, she's made a lot of really good decisions in life, and for me, and I owe a lot for sure.
What did your mum do? Was she a nurse or?
My mum has actually always been on benefits ever since I was born. I guess we're going into it, but she has a bit of mental health stuff, or she's had a history of it, which has basically meant that work has been difficult. And so actually she's been on benefits for a while, but now I take care of her and everything else. So I've taken care of her for quite a while, but that had always been a thing.
And again, that's an amazing thing to touch upon, is the fact of a woman that's dealing with all of that, a broken down relationship. She sends her son to be with her dad because she knows it's the right thing, while she's trying to maintain and get work through all of her own stuff as well. It's powerful. That is so powerful. Look, that was like 14, 15, you went through that. But then 17, I believe you started Horizon Media.
Yeah, so 17, I started Entrepreneur Express, which sold to Horizon Media.
Right.
So Entrepreneur Express. So I was always into business, basically from the age of around 15, 16, primarily because at 14, I started a tutoring business. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can just think of an idea and I can just magic it into the world. And so at 14, I'm out here thinking, wow, I can think of an idea. And so for background, I started a tutoring business where I tutored people maths, and then people started coming to me for other subjects. And then what ended up happening was I ended up building a tutoring company where I was the middleman, connecting people who were good at chemistry, physics, biology, connecting them to people who needed that and taking a cut. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I didn't need money to start this, and I've just put it into motion. So that was pretty eye-opening.
And the lesson there, I think, that you learned vicariously was the fact that I don't need money to start a business.
Yeah.
I can fund it by being a middleman and then make my first little bit of capital and then execute that capital into something else for a bigger vehicle, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm sure that we'll go into this, but like every 3 of my money making, i.e. successful money making things. So the first thing being the tutoring business. Entrepreneur Express was an online magazine where I connected people who went to business with brands and advertisers and law firms who wanted to reach that. And Fan Bytes was a quintessential middleman business connecting brands and influencers. Basically, a trend there is every single one of those businesses has been me basically being in the middle of a transaction and just adding some value and then taking a big part of the sale.
Yeah, so you essentially have looked where the trends are going at the particular times, and then you just connect the people and just take the cut in the middle, and also own some of the intellectual property and build a system around it so that you can exit it.
Yeah, exactly. And so with Entrepreneur Express, I was always very interested in business. I thought, do you know what? I want to, and at that time I was thinking about being a journalist. I had this compulsion to just write and have my content seen by people. At that time also, I was the editor-in-chief of my school magazine. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to create a business media publication similar to entrepreneur.com or forbes.com and all of those things. And so I was then very keen on getting stories and articles and insights. There's a funny story we can go into afterwards about how I got to interview Richard Branson. It's like just a crazy story. So I got all those articles in place and I was trying to drive traffic to my site. And that was when I really got into the whole social media game, because I was trying to drive traffic directly to entrepreneurexpress.com. And really, I could either use Google Ads or just like SEO, right? It was just keep growing, try and rank for the keyword, business ideas, best business ideas, 2012, blah, blah, blah. But then I thought, well, that takes too long and that's quite expensive. And so what I thought was, well, where are all the people that I actively want to meet? Oh, at that time, they're on Facebook. And because I was part of that audience, this was when I was 17, so 12 years ago, Facebook I knew was massively engaged, underpriced, etc. So I then started to learn how to actually build Facebook pages. So big Facebook pages around like motivation and inspiration, like Tony Robbins quotes, Les Dennis quotes, Jim Rohn quotes. Because my whole thing was the people who are going to watch that stuff or read that stuff would probably also be interested in my magazine as well. So the whole business model basically became, I write articles, I push them into the Facebook, they drive people back there and make money from either display advertising or some programmatic ads.
And at this point in your journey, were you thinking about anything about selling it?
No. So at that time in my journey, I was solely thinking about, this is actually a crazy thing that I can, again, think about something and just drive traffic through it. For me, the most important thing was like the fact that I was driving the traffic numbers. The reason why is, I haven't actually said this before. This is quite funny. So there was a guy, I'm not sure what he's doing now. His name was Emerson Sparks. And he actually ran a company called MuggleNet. And basically it was the biggest Harry Potter forum in the world, basically. And I had read a bunch of his stuff and I thought, that's so cool. The fact that he basically he can just wake up today and say, Harry Potter is actually 2'3", and people will say, yeah, now he is. And I thought it was quite cool that he could have all that traffic come into a site. So for me, the traffic was the most important thing. And then over time, as we began to make money from display ads, I thought, well, this is just going to be like a pure cash flow business.
Did you ever have any dreams of exiting that, or any engineered exit in that?
Yes, but I didn't know how. So
but you knew at the start that you were building it to exit.
Yeah. So the reason why is also at that point, a very famous blog. It's still live now, but I actually checked it earlier today, and no one has actually updated it for a while. But it was called Retire 21, and it's just profiled people who young internet millionaires, basically. You know, it profiled the founder of Mashable and all of these really cool sites. And I realized the trend that all of them got rich by selling, right? They didn't get rich by owning the business. They got rich by selling. So at some point I thought, you know what? Like, some way I would sell it. Me being at that point 17 and not like knowing a lot, I thought I'd sell it to Facebook, which didn't actually make any sense, right? It's like I'm getting my traffic from Facebook and I sell it to Facebook. But then I thought, actually, a bigger publication could buy it, and by a bigger publication, someone like a Forbes.com, someone like an Entrepreneur.com, someone like Inc., right? These guys who own these properties. So I had a feeling that would happen, but that was more of a secondary thing. It was only with Fan Bytes that it then became, everything I've now learned, I'm now going to make it the primary thing. But with Entrepreneur Express, it was grow traffic, have influence, and then also have an eye on potentially selling it at some point.
See, it's interesting. I did a podcast with a guy called Jeremy Harbour. I don't know if you know him, but he's a very successful investor, invested in things that Daniel Priestley runs, like Score App and stuff like that, highly invested in all of Daniel Priestley's stuff. And he said to me, like, the only time you make money is when you sell a business. He says you don't make money in the business. You basically have to craft the narrative so that you can show that the business is when you sell it, it's at the point where it's still got a long trajectory to go. And he's saying, like, this is, he doesn't build businesses like Daniel does. Like, Daniel's the business builder, like, but he just invests in them and sells them on, because that's when you get the multiples out of them.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think is somewhat contrarian is that a lot of people fall in love with their businesses and they say the business is my baby. And I've always thought that's a very stupid thing. I've always thought, well, let's even assume the business is your baby. At some point, that baby has to grow up. So by definition, unless you want to just be a helicopter parent for your baby up until it then eventually dies, you have to get rid of it at some point.
Because there aren't many, there's probably about 100 businesses in the UK that have been going for like 200-300 years.
Yeah.
But every business has a life cycle. Like, you know, and my job as an entrepreneur is to sell content removal at a time when I still think it's got 20 years left in the game, and sell that narrative as to why it's got 20 years left in the game to another reputation management company who wants to buy 3 or 4 or 5 other properties so it can roll it up on the stock exchange into a SPACs. Like, that is the narrative, isn't it? Like, that's essentially what you're doing. And if you're not building something to exit it, there's no point having the business.
Yeah, and I think as a caveat to that as well, often the business in its current form has a shorter life cycle. So by that, it could be, for example, with Fan Bytes, which we'll come to, it was an influencer marketing company. But as an influencer marketing company, maybe had 7 years, maybe max like 9 years, like as a standalone influencer marketing company. But then it can exist as an influencer marketing company as part of a bigger company, which then tucks in like paid media, SEO, and all that stuff. So your vision can still exist, but it just changes its form because it becomes part of something bigger, as opposed to it just being by itself, solely influencer marketing forever and ever.
Yeah, and that's what you were saying at the mastermind to me. Like, when you started Fan Bytes, from the very first inception, you had planned out, okay, look, we're starting this business. We're targeting Gen Z niche because other agencies aren't targeting that. We're targeting these channels. This is the organizational chart that we have to be worth this multiple. Yeah. These are the clients we have to sign to be worth that multiple on this length of deal. And caveat, we're going to sell it to this company. That is how detailed you got with the plan. I want you to run through that from start to finish, because when you told me that, it blew my mind, and I thought there's no podcast in the world that have this information.
Okay, well, all right. So How do you design a business to exit? So I think it actually starts from the jump as to what sort of business you decide to start. A lot of people don't pay consideration to that, and then they try and think about, well, how do I design this business to exit? But actually, a more important thing is, what business in general are you even going to start? So in relation to Fan Bytes, a big thing was I saw the trend of influencer marketing going up. I actually saw it from the US, and I thought, okay, that's interesting. I'm seeing it grow. And I'd also had consumed enough data and consumed enough information about past industry trends to say, do you know what? This is what's going to happen. It's going to be its own independent thing for a very long time. And by very long, we're talking, say, 5 to 7 years. And then once it's been able, and by independent, I mean when the big radio companies started or the big PR companies started, they all started saying, we only do radio, we only do PR. And then what happens is over 7 to 10 years is a period of consolidation, because the big guys, the guys who are already in the industry say, do you know what? We don't do PR. We don't do radio. We're now going to buy it, and now it's going to be part of it. But that only happens when the business or the industry is so nascent that it's small enough and specialist enough for customers wanting to just have just this thing. And then eventually, as the trend grows, is big enough to then be bought. So that was the first thing. I paid a lot of attention to what business, and does it tick the box of, is it fast growing? Is it something that in silo? And most importantly, is there going to be consolidation later on down the line? A lot of companies I see, they start off their businesses and they don't think about, where am I in this industry's trend? They just think like, here's a business, it makes money, right? So that's the first thing. I was very intentional about that. So we've picked the industry. Now, the next thing is, what role are you actively going to play in the industry? So I often make this joke, which is like, Fan Bytes started off as a Gen Z company, but maybe there was a world where we only targeted 80 plus year old grandmothers, right? Basically, I had to pick an industry which made sense, where we could have some kind of credibility. And at that point, yes, I personally had a bit of business success, but like, what really gave us enough credibility? Oh, it was the fact that I started it when I was 21. My co-founder was 19 and my other co-founder was also 21. I was like, ooh, Gen Z, tick box, because other people aren't doing that, because our competitors in the space are like older 30 something, 40 something white men. And we're just going to come into the industry as like the Gen Z people who are going to help you tap into Gen Z. But then the third thing, which was even most important, was then like, who do we go after? And then what is our funding strategy? So funny enough, throughout the duration of the business, we only raised, how much? $2 million. And some of the other people in the space who are still now struggling. In fact, there's a company now which has gone completely bankrupt because they raised too much money. I think they raised like 6 million. And I was like, you shouldn't have done that. But we raised enough money and we targeted the type of customers so that we were valued small enough so that when we then went to market to sell the company, we weren't at like $100 million price, but we were still substantial enough that it would change our lives and be actually like a pretty sizable acquisition for someone. Because a lot of people absolutely screw themselves over by basically raising too much money, which means that when they want to eventually try and sell the business, they have investors who say, yo, we just raised that 80 million. And I know if we sell for even 50 million, it will make you, the founders, 10 million each. But we just raised that 80 million. And as an investor, that means that we have to sell for a minimum of 100 million. And the founders are like, what the heck? We have a buyer who's prepared to buy us for, say, 50 million, and we each walk away with 10 million, and it's so amazing. But because 2 years ago, we thought, yo, let's go raise a VC round and let's raise at the highest valuation possible, we've basically fucked ourselves from actually getting rich because we just played the valuation game. So those three main considerations. One was like the industry that we picked, nascent, so there was consolidation. Then I picked a specific niche, which I thought we could have credibility in, and eventually a buyer would say, we don't know Gen Z. We want to buy Gen Z. expertise. And then the other thing was like our funding strategy was meant that when eventually we saw consolidation and it came to market, it wasn't something where it was like, right, we've raised at so high a valuation that actually any mid-market person spending between like 30 and 70 million for our type of company would just be like, yeah, that makes sense. And our investors would also be happy, because that's a very important thing, right? So people often have boards in their businesses and it's like, oh, well, you know, your investor is going to block it. I have a friend who 2 weeks ago, he had an opportunity to sell his company and an investor blocked it because basically it wouldn't make at least 8x. And so he's just there like running the business, and he can't sell it because basically one of his board members, when they invested, they said like, we basically need to have a valuation of like minimum 8x what we put in, or we block the sale.
So that investor would rather lose his investment. He'd rather see that business go bankrupt potentially because it's run its life cycle than he would pull out now.
Yeah.
And what obviously that offer wasn't 8x. What was the offer, like 6x or something? 5x?
I think it was like 5. It would have netted him, I think you told me it would have netted him 21 million. Yeah.
See, a 5x in this market right now is pretty good.
Yeah, but remember that if you have raised from a VC, they have a kind of target price they want to hit from you.
One of the interesting things that you told me was about how you can exit along the way and get large amounts of capital out.
Yeah, secondaries.
So explain the secondaries and how the secondaries work, because this blew my fucking mind.
Yeah, so this is actually really interesting, and I know we said some names in the thing which we're not going to say.
No, don't say the names.
Yeah.
I don't want you to say the names.
Yeah.
I know the names, but I don't want you to discuss names. I want you to just tell everyone on this podcast that's listening to this podcast how they can engineer the secondaries and how they can use it to pull cash out of the business along the way, so they're not waiting for one exit event.
Yeah. So secondaries are the secret a lot of tech founders wouldn't tell you about how they got rich. So how it works is that when you have a business which is in a fast growth, or more importantly in a hype cycle, what you can then do is say, do you know what? I want to focus on the long-term vision of the business. I really want to take it to the moon, but I also need to be able to make sure that I'm not worrying about my finances and my family and everything. So what I like to do is a secondary, where I sell a part of my shares to the investors who then want to invest in this fast growing thing. Now, here's the thing. A lot of that is absolute BS, because what it is basically their way of getting money out of the business. So what happens is you then sell your shares to the investors, and people have done 5 million secondaries, 20 million secondaries, 50 million secondaries. There's a story about the founder of Hopin, which was this company which during COVID did virtual events, and basically they raised at a $7 billion valuation. The company has now just sold for $5 million. And he took, at that hype cycle, he took 250 million in secondaries. And
you were explaining that is just cash out the back door, straight into the founder's pocket.
Just to you.
And it doesn't have to go back into the business at all.
It's all to you. Anytime, for the people listening, anytime you see a company which around, say, Series A has raised more than 20 million, you can safely say maybe 20%, 20 to 30% of that has just gone to the founders.
So there's literally like people that are listening to this will have invested in companies thinking they're buying pieces of companies, really not understanding that all they're doing is paying for the founder's exit.
Yeah. A lot of the UK founders, the ones who say go from company to company to company, you just go, okay.
There's a company in Australia called Afterpay.
Oh, yes, I know those guys.
And I'm sure...
Fat secondaries.
I'm sure they've absolutely rinsed secondaries. I'm sure companies like Canva have done it.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I'm sure all them ZipPay went on an absolute tear in Australia as well. They're worth hardly anything now, but they were doing mad secondaries as well. And it's funny that when you mentioned it to me, I had to like research. I'm like, wow, you're so right that this happens so often, because I'd never heard of it before. But then when I looked at shares that I've bought in the past, just through the banks and stuff like that on a small scale. I'm like, fuck, a lot of these offerings are like literally just cash washes. All we're doing is paying for the founders' exits, and I knew nothing about it.
Yeah, and the thing is, it is possible. Same way it is possible for you to engineer a big company sale, it is possible for you to almost build a company knowing you'll make money just from secondaries. And a big part of it is just build in a very, very hot space. If you build anything with like AI something now, and you went to any of these like Joker VCs and you just said, yo, so raising, and then next round, oh, you know what? I want to focus on the long-term vision and feed my family, even though you don't have any fucking family, right? Just take 5 million off.
So it's really, is it something that VCs aren't aware of, or are the VCs?
Oh, no, they do it.
So the VC and the founders are working together to clip the capital off the table.
Yeah, but remember, all the VC wants is just equity in the company. And so it doesn't matter really if the equity comes from like the company or from you. If basically I'm like, if I think your company is so hot that I need to get 10% of it, and you happen to own 50% of it, and you say, do you know what? We'll do 5% that comes from the company and 5% that comes from you. I'm like, I don't really care because I just want in on the company.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of like, it makes sense to every party because the VCs are winning, the founder gets money off the table. The only one essentially that loses is the people in the market that don't really understand the concept of secondaries and how they're used. And
sometimes, quite frankly, and sometimes the employees. Like,
or they get washed out in the secondaries too.
Well, think about it. You might own shares in a company and think that your increase in valuation is because the company now has more money to work on its growth. But if headline price, we have just raised 40 million Series A, and you're someone who works in a company, you go, yeah, now we have like 40 million to, increase our salaries, to spending growth, etc. But actually 20 million of that has gone to the founder. Yeah. Then...
And the founders are within his right to take that because at the end of the day, he took the risk in the initial period to start the business anyway. So, and at the end of the day, I don't blame any of the founders because if there's a legal way that you can de-risk yourself, 100% take it. Yeah. But I wanted you to show both sides of that and how you can win because I think a lot of people that have companies that listen to this should consider doing secondaries.
Yeah, I mean,
take some cash off the table where you can because the market. You don't know. Like you should be taking money off the table every stage, raising every year, taking some off the table, especially like you say with these AI companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think most founders so what are the main criteria to have secondaries? One is to be in a hype cycle. Cool. But let's say that you're not in a hype cycle. If your company is growing quite fast, now you have the leverage and you can then basically take, say, half of the money that you raise in secondaries. I've seen people do this for like very boring businesses like fire door replacement companies where it grows, 60% every single year. And yes, they get profits, but actually they want to take something bigger than profits. So they say, let's go take some money out. Let's go raise some money, get some small private equity person in, and we'll put in whatever. They'll invest 10 million. We'll take 5, put 5 in the business.
It's mental, isn't it? Like when you actually just say it like that, it just baffles my mind how easy that is for like founders just take money off the table. Quick one for you guys. This podcast is sponsored by contentremover.com. As many of you are probably aware, I set up contentremoval.com in 2017 to help people remove all forms of online content, and I've looked after some of the biggest names and brands in the world doing it. And I would love to help you if you're struggling. If you're struggling to remove images, videos, search results, fake accounts, or anything online, go to contentremover.com and we'll help you today.
You have to know the rules of the game. I think doing Fan Bytes and really spending time with a lot of like really accomplished founders, etc., and some of our investors as well, just saying, hey, look, like, another reason why VCs actually do this whole secondary game is because they want to establish a longer term relationship with the founder. Mm-hmm. So, for example, with me, I was in my mid-20s. A lot of people would go, well, if this guy in his mid-20s has been able to build a company to this level, then the next company he does will be absolutely crazy, which therefore means that actually, even if we gave him like a secondary now, it's actually fine because we know when it comes to his next thing, yeah.
It is interesting as well that when you were positioning to sell the company, Fan Bytes, you showed a certain narrative to the to the acquiring customer. Break down the narrative you pitched, because what you were essentially doing when you show this narrative, as you'll explain, is what you were doing is you're future pacing the trajectory curve of the company. If I'm correct in saying that.
Exactly. So one thing a lot of entrepreneurs should realize when it comes to selling your company is that no one is buying you just because they like you. They're buying you because they think they can make money from this transaction. And so the best way to then give them that confidence is to show them the future of what your business can look like and make it so absolutely undeniable that it's just a very easy yes from them. So in our case, I actually ended up calling it the 70% rule, which is basically often the mistake a lot of entrepreneurs make when they want to sell their companies is that they basically try and squeeze out every possible thing from the business
before they sell it. And they often sell it when it's like, okay, I'm done with the business and I want to go do something else, or I have maxed out the market. Whereas the key is almost, if you imagine a graph, people often, and let's say here is time and Y is business performance. What happens is every business tends to go like, ooh, and then it hits a peak and then it just kind of goes down, right? Often what people tend to do is they try and sell at the peak. What you should do is try and sell like in the middle, or actually just above the middle, around 70% of the way there. The reason why is then you have this growth story, but more importantly, you have enough things to then be able to say to a potential buyer, look at all the things that you can do, and actually you're a better place to do that. Because you built a roadmap to show them all the moves that you would make ahead of the schedule on the curve so that they could see how they were going to make the money.
Exactly. So in our case, for example, I run the company for 6 years. We had 50% of our revenue came from the US, but we did not have a single person there. And that was completely intentional because I said, well, if we go to the US and we make it work, then we've kind of squeezed all the juice. If we go to US and we don't make it work, then we've also shown that this doesn't work in the US. But actually, to a buyer, it makes perfect sense because if they already have the boots on the ground in the US and they have a big operation there, then really, you're saying 50% of a multi-8-figure revenue business is here, and now we have people here. It's very obvious of how we're just going to take this business and just absolutely skyrocket it. The other thing that the other narrative here was just about how we did a lot of organic influencer stuff, but we didn't do much in the way of paid media. We had a team of 80 people, but only 2 people were in paid media. The reason why was because I had a hunch that the company that would buy Fan Bytes would be a company that was big in the performance marketing space. So if you then say, hey, a small part of our revenue, but is growing, is in performance media, suddenly you can now say, well, if we just enlarge this part of the business, we make our money back. And then the third thing, which I think was actually a very important part of it, was I still retained that focus on Gen Z. And then I basically was like, well, if you extend the technology and the services that we have and you extend that to your clients, then what you can end up doing is for the same amount of clients, like the same clients that are already spending with you, if you suddenly add in the Gen Z capability, suddenly you can make more money. So to a buyer, I'm basically saying, well, here are all the various ways you can basically make your money and more back. One, if you just expanded into the US and took that 50% of revenue, you would easily do well. 2, we have a small but growing part, which is performance media. This is your speciality. If you just did that, you can make it back. And then 3, none of your brands are doing Gen Z stuff if you just added the Gen Z capability to there. So now, as a buyer, I'm like, wow, it is undeniable that by just buying this company, I am going to make a lot more money than the amount that I'm going to spend for it.
And you stack win after win after win.
Yeah.
You make it undeniable, but also you built out the organizational chart within the company to look like a business that can be acquired for 8 figures.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about you can't just have a flat company with like one director and then everyone reporting to the one director, because no one's going to buy that, because it's too on a pivot, right?
Yeah.
So you have to you mapped out what departments you were going to have, how many were going to be in the department, who generates the revenue, you know, where the most important roles were, right from the start, right?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what, I would like to take a lot of credit to say that I mapped that out from the start, but I say I mapped that out from year 3.
Right. So that's when so once you had a clear plan you want to exit and what you want to exit for and who you're going to exit to, but then once you'd understood, okay, how fast the market was running and the trajectory curve, that's when you said, right, now I know the trajectory curve and now I know the life cycle. I know where I need to sell it. So now I need to reverse engineer what people I need on the boat at this point to be able to sell it for 8 figures. Yeah.
Yeah. And how did I do that? I actually remember specifically how I did that. I looked at bigger companies to us, and I basically had this Excel sheet which itemized every single job title in their senior ranks of every company. I think I had like 15 companies, all of them which were 150 to 300 people. And so we had companies like We Are Social. I was like, okay, they have a head of creative. That's interesting. They have a head of sales. And then I just did that over and over and over again. And I noticed there was like some specific roles that they always needed. And then I just, over time, over probably a year or so, I just went to, find those people. Okay, you come in head of sales. You come in head of marketing. You come in head of creative. And then I did this experiment. Maybe every few months I'd do this thing where I would just not work for 2 weeks.
And see if it still made money.
Exactly. Not only see if you still make money, see if the machine wouldn't break.
Yeah.
Right.
And also see if you'd still, see if it would still run at the same rate, or if it would make more money than when you were there.
Exactly. And it was only at that, I think that it would make more money only happened, say, in 2020, late stage 2020, early stage 2021, I was like, okay, now we have it. Now we have it. Now they are landing in bigger deals. Now they're doing all that jazz.
And one thing before we step off this topic that I think is so important to this, because we've talked about how you engineered it for selling, but the client acquisition and the way that you acquired clients was pretty unique, because you were leveraging. I want you to tell the story of how you signed the first big client and then how you leveraged that to sign the others, because a lot of creative businesses need this information so that they can go and sign big clients.
Yeah. So I'll tell 2 stories. One is of the first clients we brought on, and then one is of the biggest clients that we brought on, because I think those two are slightly different. So the first clients that I brought on, so the first thing that we did was niche down into music and record labels. So we ended up getting, I think the first was, I want to say Warner, and we got them to just do I think it was literally like $3,000 or $2,000. It was just like the smallest campaign.
Just get them on the board. Yeah.
Just get them in, right? And I think they would just spend everything on the campaign, so they had incredible results. And then we made the wickedest case study ever. And then we just went to, Universal, and we basically was like, hey, Warner paid $25,000 for this. And then they were like, okay, this is very good. We want that as well. But even before that, a thing that we did, which I think in hindsight was a very good thing, and I couldn't plan it out, because my thought was get Warner, use Warner to get Sony, use Sony to get Universal, become known as like the leading authority in the record label space. What's this? Warner, Sony, and Universal are the 3 biggest labels, but underneath them, they also have a bunch of sub-labels. So where it got really interesting was actually if you landed like a Warner Music, you could then land sub-labels under Warner Music, which means that thing of going to Warner, Universal, Sony, you can even do that just inside of Warner.
In the verticals, yeah.
So you land one, and then what that means is then you become known as the person for that. But once I'd realized it was working, then what I did was I thought, right, there are a bunch of customers in here. We can't go to all the customers. We have to figure out how to bring the customers over to us. And so what we did, I actually learned this from Russell Brunson. What we did was identified like the 3 biggest publications that the people in any industry read. So let's say the music one. So it was Music Ally, Music Week, Music Business Worldwide. And what we did was we just went to each of them and we came up with some kind of content or data, which was like, these are the top 10 artists that Gen Z love, or these are the biggest trends on TikTok. These are the biggest blah, blah. Or the best one was one that we did in fashion, which absolutely fucking crushed it. And I think everyone can use this for their industry. We created a fashion leaderboard. So we basically were like, the top brands that Gen Z love in fashion. All right, here's ASOS, here's Gymshark, here's blah, blah, blah. And then the brands that we actually wanted to work with, they were not number 1 or 2 or 3, right? And so suddenly they would see that data and they would be like, oh, we want to be number 1 or 2. And then we say, well, come and do a free consultation. And then in there, they'd go out, Fan Bytes are the thought leaders. So that content format achieved 2 benefits. It meant people came to us, like, oh my God, this is amazing. But more importantly, it made a lot of noise in the industry. And because it made a lot of noise in the industry, actually, when it came to the sale of the business and we appointed the banks to represent us, etc., 4 companies put in bids, but 3 of them already knew about Fan Bytes because we had just been almost those noisy neighbors over so many years that they just thought, these guys always seem to be popping up in all these new things. So that's the benefit of this very niche approach, and then using one client to get the other, and then using content for people to come to you rather than you going to them.
I did a similar thing as you with signing influencers back in the day for content removal. I thought I'm not going to start at the bottom of the industry doing 1, 2, 3K deals. I want to sign fitness influencers. That was my niche. Fitness and fashion influencers in Australia, between anywhere between like 4 to 12, 13 million followers, female only. They're getting targeted online. They're having their digital IP stolen, misused, all that kind of stuff. And I just targeted them. And within 2 months, I'd got it to 500K a year recurring revenue. And it was like all cold email and cold LinkedIn outreach. I signed three girls at the time. It was, I won't mention the names, but anyway, I signed 3 girls in that niche, and then boom, boom, boom. And it was like, wow, that's just changed the game for me. What you did well is you continued. You did it and then you continued. What I did in my younger days, I went sat on the fucking beach and just fucking chilled out because that was just a dumb decision by my part. But still, reverse engineering the outcome is so powerful when you actually just sit before you start something and actually think. So my question to you now is, if you were going to start again today and you could pick any niche and then I basically want to know from you what niche you'd pick, like what niche and what story would you craft? Because it's all about the story from your experience. What story would you craft in order to create the buzz so you could have a sellable story in that niche?
So the first thing I would do is I would firstly look at who is already buying. So a big part of this whole building, scaling, selling a company is you want to sell into existing demand, not to create demand. So I would look at what private equity firms are already buying. And you see a lot of private equity firms are buying a lot of B2B companies. They're buying a lot of these kind of AI assisted type companies. So I'd go, okay, well, we're still at the beginning of this trend of AI, and I can just see that there'll just be more and more consolidation going over. And I know the buyers, most importantly, I would not be necessarily focused on an industry. I'd be focused on a type of buyer. So I wouldn't be focused on, say, all right, I want to look into the media space. I would just go broadly. I know private equity buyers are buying, whether in healthcare or in music or in blah, blah, they are buying these AI-assisted B2B companies. So that'll be the first thing, who is already buying.
How long a window do you normally get in an industry like that to get? Is it like 3 or 4 years to sell it in the buzz period?
3, well, from the time that it is, what is this thing?
Yeah.
So this is how it happens. again, this is like the inside baseball, because I've sat with bankers and just like understood this. This is what happens. Some trend happens, AI, blah, blah, blah. About 6 months afterwards, after people have vaguely understood it, someone like a Goldman or a BCG or a Bain or a McKinsey puts out a report and said, this is the future. Then what happens is a bunch of these private equity people basically in, say, another 6 to 12 months basically go, oh, Goldman just brought our report saying this is going to be the hot thing. Now let's change our thesis to buy these sort of companies. So that's taking you about 18 months now from the time that it came into that. And then what happens is that they then look and search. It takes another about 8 to 12 months for someone to do like a big deal, right? And a big deal could mean someone like the Carlyle Group or Silver Lake. These are two big private equity firms. They do a big deal, which is like $500 million, and we've just bought this AI-assisted $500 million company. And then suddenly everyone in the middle goes,
Right. So you're looking one, get those data reports. So you're looking ahead of the schedule. And then once the big acquisition happens, i.e., years ago, that would have been like Canva. Canva getting funded would have been a big standout. Once Canva got funded, okay, that tells you what the market wants to buy now. And Canva's standout valuation means that you're going to get like another 4, 5, 10x on what your actual value would normally be if they hadn't have sold for that amount of money. And then you pivot yourself into that market.
Yeah, because then... So you have the big acquisition, and then suddenly all the guys who are under the big guy, the micro P or the P guys who are buying between, say, 50 million to 300 million, 50 to 200 million, they're like, cool, the standard has been set, now we go buy.
Yeah. Right? And then they use the standard that someone else set on their prospectus as a case study as to why other people should buy the narrative that they're selling in the industry.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how the cookie crumbles right the way through, isn't it?
Yeah, and then it just filters and filters and filters and filters. Because the other thing that's also very important about when you sell your company, because remember, even though we talk about narratives and stuff, it's not a game of like you say something and then you trick the buyer. No, it's not some kind of I trick you by saying this, but really is not the truth. It is an objective thing with the numbers, and often these buyers also have their own narrative, right? They have their own story that they also have to sell to private equity people, and then those private equity people also have their own story that they have to sell to LPs, and the LPs are the pension funds and the banks. So when you are effective, like building a narrative around why your company would be valuable, you have to understand how that narrative also fits in with the buyer's narrative to then their private equity. So let's say you're selling content removal, right? And you're saying something like, well, so actually, let's take a step back. Is it fair to say that most of the customers for content removal are like social media influencers, that sort of thing?
Social media influencers, people's having their reputation damaged online, get a lot of traffic from Google as well.
Okay, great. So actually, it's fair to say that actually that kind of mid-market is where you're focusing on, right?
Yeah.
And then there are a bunch of other companies in the reputation management space who perhaps are focusing on like the higher tier, where they have like salespeople who are going in trying to do these big enterprise deals,
business development managers type businesses, like your Status Labs, like your reputationmanagement.com, like your Reputation Defender. Yeah.
Perfect. So often with these sort of companies, and I'm going to guess they've raised money, they've done the whole thing, right?
Yeah, we looked through quite a few of them, didn't we? And quite a few of them have been raising funds from capital.
Yeah, exactly, right. So they've raised venture capital, or they've raised some kind of private equity. So that means even in the process of raising capital, they obviously have a story they have to tell to the VCs and to the PE firms. And so one way, if you are engineering a sale, you can say, hey, so most of your stuff is through direct sales, hardcore outreach, doing these big enterprise deals. You don't really have access to the search volume and the SEO and the mid-market stuff that we're doing here. Your last valuation, you were valued on, let's pick a number, you were valued on 5 times sales, right? Well, let's even make it better. You were valued on 8 times sales. but that's you as like an enterprise company. And so, but we know that basically you could buy us for, say, 4x sales, but us, i.e. content removal, being part of you guys would basically add on another, say, 6x to your valuation. So you're buying us for 4x, but we know it will add another 6x to your already 8x. So if basically, like, we basically add another 2x sales to you, by you not actually like creating any new products, you're just buying us, then that's the deal that I'll do all day. Because basically I'm saying, if I buy you, I'm just going to pick a number. If I buy you for 20 million, I add 40 million to my valuation. All right, cool.
Yeah. And
I'll do that any day.
Yeah, because it's a no-brainer, because they're just buying revenue and multiple on top of what they're already doing, which allows them to sell a new narrative. And not only that, when you take out a competitor like contentremoval.com out of the space and your reputation defender, you own their search results.
Yeah.
So owning their search results and owning their activity, and when you've got a domain like contentremoval.com, it's got 14 years of history in search. Exactly. It's valuable. You can't just go outranking that with 10,000 new links. It doesn't just happen like that. You got it's time in the market. It's contextually relevant.
Yeah.
Everything, the whole story, the whole narrative to it.
Yeah, which adds a whole different thing. So even, I mean, as you say all of that, I'm like, okay, so let's even say someone buys for 5x. Actually, because they have the brand value, because they have that domain authority, because they have all this that, they probably add on another 7x to just their valuation. So it's like literally, like it's like me giving you £10 and then you giving me like 20 quid and saying, do you want to do it again? I was like, well, yeah, okay, there you go. Like this, you know what I mean?
It literally is them buying free money.
Yeah.
Because
it's free money. Yeah.
But then as a founder, I get to say that I've exited my business, and I exit it for a decent amount of money. I go and do my podcast full time, and et cetera, et cetera. I go do what I want to do. I play my narrative, but they've won all day long. Yeah. And I know it's such a simple way to look at how you can exit, and the whole thing, the most important thing that you've said is about the story that you can tell. It's like when you start a business, okay, what story can I tell then when I want to exit this business? And what juice is going to be left in there for someone else to squeeze? Because if there's no juice left and you just tried to squeeze this little cash cow and not offer anyone else any value, you are fucking yourself, like some of the other founders that you know, when it comes to, they got a £23 million business that they can't sell because they've sold equity out to Steve over here. And Steve, because you sold 10% to Steve, and you gave Steve some stupid voting rights on your limited company, Steve can now say, well, hang on a minute, I invested $1 million, I want 8 million out minimum. Yeah. So for £1 million of investment, you fucked yourself on 23. Yeah. But people don't know this.
Yeah.
People literally just walking straight by this every time. But if you were going to pick, obviously that's for contentremoval.com, but if I said to you, pick a niche now.
So I think, I mean, all right, so yeah, we went off track from that, didn't we? So I think I would say, who is buying? I would go B2B, 100%. Definitely not B2C. I think there's too much variation in that. And I would look for something where it's like high average order value. So maybe 20K a year is some kind of recurring thing.
It's like a service-based business.
Yeah, I'd go like some AI-assisted service-based business, something that sells to a high-value clientele. So it may be something in like legal profession.
I know so many AI businesses that have got AI on the label but are not AI at all, but they get the valuation because AI is in the label. That's what a lot of them are doing.
Yeah. So yeah, something in legal, dental, something where it's like relatively high ticket, recurring, and actually the AI leads to cost efficiency, because that's the reason a lot of PE guys are now really circling around the like AI companies. It is just because like where you can use AI to actually bring down cost in something, it genuinely is actually like a transformative thing.
I know. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, there's lots of products that say they can edit video clips for podcasts and edit content for multiple channels. I mean, to be honest, I don't use. We use a few of them, but they're not really that good. They're not yet. But I imagine in another two years' time, I'll be able to fire a podcast into an editing software, and it edits the full length episode, the this, the that. Once it gets to that standard, it's game on for like content creation and stuff like that. And if you own the business that has the tech to do that, like in its full entirety, take a full episode or a YouTube video and edit in the same way at that level, which I think we're 2.5 years away from doing, that changed the game.
I mean, that is that's a good business. I don't know if that's a business I'd ever start. I think it's actually it's a hard business because a lot of other people can make the same claims as you.
Right.
And
how would you? So how? What's the differentiable variable that you're using? How are you getting that thing that stands out so that it's defendable in some way?
So I think firstly it has to be a niche focus. That really matters to me. I'm really fascinated by niche companies. The reason why I look at these kind of content creation things, as someone who creates content online, I get pitched probably 2 to 3 of these every single week. And there's some variation of, we take your podcast clips, we use AI to figure out the best moments, and then we'll cut it.
Everyone says that narrative,
right? And the challenge with that is it doesn't lean directly into revenue as well. That's a big thing. I think the best businesses, I'll tell you what, actually, a big transformational moment for Fan Bytes was when we basically changed the sale to be really about ROI. At first, it was just more about, you get engagement and views and stuff. And then we tweaked the business where we thought, right, we now have enough data where we can actually say that if you spend 50 grand and we use these influencers and got this engagement rate, we know that your cost per click will probably be this. So therefore, we can then estimate that your actual traffic and your results would be X. So now suddenly I'm like, oh, if I put in 50K and I get 100K of revenue, fuck, I'm just going to keep doing that. And
I remember actually you developed a widget on your website that showed that data.
Yeah, it did.
And you used it as a lead magnet.
Yeah.
Because I remember you back in the day.
That's funny. Yeah.
I remember back in the day looking at Fan Bytes because I saw that, because I thought, that would, if I did that in reputation management, like if you spend this much on reputation management and you remove this much content, it looks like blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? That's where I got that from.
Well, there you go. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think a lot of businesses will make more money if they took on a bit more of the risk. So at the beginning, we were just very much like, views, engagement. And then it was like, well, these guys want sales. What if we said, hey, here's an estimation of the sales that we think we can get you rather than, here's the views and stuff like that. Yeah.
So you make it a no-brainer by pay on removal makes it a no-brainer. Like pay on delivery of content. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes it's hard in our industry because of how much time and effort and work goes into the removal of the content and how many systems and processes need to happen to make things move. So I know other brands do this pay on removal stuff, but they drive more volume, and that basically the reason they scale at the level they scale is because they know that even though 90% of the stuff they can't remove, they scale on the 10% that they can. You know what I mean? So that's the kind of, if you want to run a volume business, that is the way you run a volume business.
Yeah, I guess in each industry, right? Like at some point you have the volume. And then at some point you have the
high ticket, right? Yeah. And you just got to ride each curve, haven't you?
Yeah, you have to basically decide which one we're going to be and just lean aggressively into it.
Can you be both?
I think you can be both after spending a lot of time being one.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
When you say a lot of time, how long is a lot of time to you?
I think if you spend between 3 to 5 years being one.
Yeah. And you're right. I've been doing contentremoval.com since 2017. So you see, nothing is successful without putting the time and the energy into it. People, I think 5 years is an optimal time to see where you are in business and what you can do and have something that is exitable. Most people think they can spin it around in 12 months, but you just don't have the store unless you're in
super hype cycle thing.
Unless you're in a super hype cycle or an absolute unicorn standout in that cycle, you're not far enough along the growth curve to understand what you understood at 3 years to be able to craft the narrative for the next 2 years to be able to pivot and sell it is what I'm saying. Yeah. And people get fucked up. So I think you need to be in an industry, like you say, that's in all the that's on all the areas that you say, which is in an uptrend, this, that, and the other. But I think they have to be interested in it as well and be able to know that they've got to stay in it for 3 years to be able to get to the growth curve, haven't they?
Yeah, I think I don't know if I'd agree with that. I think you can be very passionate about business and not be passionate about the business.
Break it down for me.
Well, I mean, I don't think I was hugely passionate about influencer marketing, but I was passionate about the building of a business which involved building a sales team, building a marketing team, building a finance team.
So you're saying fall in love with the building of a business and then take yourself out of the metric of what business that is.
Yeah.
I like that. Because that is a great way to frame it, 100%. Because if everyone framed it like that, you just know, okay, I'm going to play the game of business for the next 40 fucking years, and I would like to get 1, 2, 3 exits in the next 40 years, and I might get my first exit for 2 million, then my second exit is for 10, and then my third exit is for 57 million. Cool, I'm sweet. I know by 45, I'm out the game, retired.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can roll it like that.
People say this a lot. Mark Cuban, right? His first ever business, he sold when he was, say, 34 or something, and he made $2 million from it, right? And then after that was when he built broadcast.com, sold to Yahoo for 5.7 billion. He's actually a very perfect example of basically a guy who just picked right, because his business ended up being shut down by Yahoo after 2 years. They spent 5.7 billion. Most of it was also in Yahoo shares. And he basically had the option to like sell shares at a certain time. But guess what period it was? In 2000, 2001, where everything with a .com was like, boom, right? Yes. So he picked right, and then in 3-4 years, he became a billionaire. So why? Because he picked right.
Right niche, right time, right growth trajectory. It's like everything you say, and right story.
Right story, yeah.
Right story, but the story is the most powerful bit. It's like, I like the way that you dissected it and took away the business, so you become someone who loves business rather than someone who loves the niche of business you're in. I like that. But I also like the fact of like, you're playing a long-term game, but you're crafting a story and a narrative that you can sell. So you gotta fall in love with two things: business and telling stories. Because that is all you're doing essentially. You're refining your business skills and applying your knowledge, and then you're telling the right story. And we saw it with William Brown, like how he told his story to sell that information business. I mean, it's a powerful way, isn't it?
Yeah. I think what's also hugely important, and I want your listeners to take from this, is when we talk about crafting a story, it's very important to know that it is not some kind of deviant story where you say something and then afterwards you've tricked them to buy it. No, right?
No, the story's got to be real.
Yeah. A story that's real, which is based on objectively helping the buyer as well. Because remember, actually the worst thing you can do, there's this girl, I forgot her name, but she sold a company to JP Morgan. The headline price was for 75 million. Turns out all the numbers in terms of what she sold was just fake. It was completely fake. And JP Morgan found out. She had this email newsletter. And basically a year afterwards, JP Morgan found out saying this is all fake. And now she's in jail. Because she sold a narrative, but it was just a fake narrative.
I think to even break it down further than that, it's like, show the true narrative and make sure it's something. Essentially what you're doing is you're showing a real clear reason as to why buying this is the best idea for this business, and it's a genuine reason to do that. And you're just basically, by crafting this story, you're making it so undeniable as to why you're going to add value to them that it's a no-brainer. You get your win, they get their win, and the shareholders win. So everybody wins. Win. You just got to craft that narrative. Whatever that narrative is, as long as it's true, everyone wins.
Exactly.
You exit for however much, and then obviously you start thinking, right, I've gone to my bank account. I remember you saying this to me. You went to was it NatWest?
Santander.
You went to Santander. You look in your hole in the wall. This is just your current account. And your current account's gone from whatever to what you told me. And I was like, fuck, bro. Like, what's that fucking feeling like when you've got like...
Yeah.
Because you've let's not forget. Let's go back. You come from Old Kent Road. And you've been on the estate. You've seen people... You were literally about to go for a ride out at the start of this podcast. Yeah. And now you're sat there and you're looking at Santander. You sat there. You're looking at these minutes. What's going through your mind, bro?
Two things are going through my mind. The first one is, how the fuck did we get here? Like, kind of, oh my God. I actually have a video on my phone of when the money landed, and I'm sitting perched next to a wall with my co-founders who are just like shouting, saying, and I'm just like, oh my God. And I recorded it, I think subconsciously, to make sure that I knew it was real.
Yeah.
Then the second thought was, wow, Now what?
And the third thought is, wow, I'm only protected up to £80,000 in Santander. Because that must be going through your mind.
I mean, to be honest, I only knew about that after I started talking to my wealth managers and they said, yo, move the account somewhere else or move it to a different place. Because actually, I only opened up. What made it even really funny was I only opened up a Santander account so I could have the money in there. Because actually before that, I had 2 accounts, a Monzo and a Starling.
Yeah.
And I was like, ain't no fucking way that Monzo Starling. I'm going to just have like millions in the account. And I'm calling them like, hey, can you move it to this thing? And then they're asking me all those questions. No. So that was actually the only reason I got like a conventional bank. And then, now I have different banks. But yeah, that was fun.
And now you invest in avocados.
Now I invest in avocados, I invest in horoscopes, I invest in a whole range of things. So one of the things I found, which is actually quite interesting, is most of my friends, and I now fall into that category, most of the people who've had, say, a big win from the sale of a business actually tend to, having now realized how much effort that took, actually now tend to go on the field of cash flow businesses. Things that you can invest in and that they do very well. And one of the things is, like funding avocados. So I made friends with a commodity trading firm in Kenya. And basically I've known the founder for quite a while. He's been doing it for a while. And I said, hey, can I, park some money in there? And so far so good. It pays every quarter. It basically pays for my life. I've invested in a bunch of other stuff like this horoscope business that I am actually in the process of buying now. Some lithium businesses, just like a whole range of things. Yeah,
basically you everything that you're interested in, but also things that are attached to your culture as well. Wouldn't you say?
Actually, that is interesting. Yeah, I never thought about that, but I guess, to some degree. I mean, I primarily look at it from a financial lens, right?
No, you do, but also a lot of your things are very like, there are a lot of African businesses in there. Like when you actually break it down, like, there's more African businesses, I would say, than there are others.
Yeah. That is interesting. I think, I mean, I'm sure
Have you never thought about that?
No, never, never. I think for me, it's more like I get a lot of interesting opportunities, and the opportunities where I see a clear, whether it's like an arbitrage or limited downside, because of the people that I happen to know, et cetera, tend to actually be opportunities that stem from being in Africa. But I never thought about it, actually. That's interesting.
But it's the first thing that when you told me your story and we sat there and we're talking about it and we're talking about all these things over a couple of days in that mastermind, what I thought was, I was looking for the patterns within you, the patterns so that I could ask you the right questions to get the right information out to this audience, but also the patterns where, what is he doing here? And one of the patterns I noticed was, he stays in his lane of competence. So he has a circle of competence and he looks within it. So he's like, right, I know this part of Africa and I know that lithium mining is a thing there. So I'll invest in that. I understand my mates in Africa here does avocados, and I know that they always need money because there's from the time of sale to this, there needs to be a funding point between that thing. Well, I know from my middleman businesses that I'm going to sit in the middle of that transaction and clip the ticket. Yeah. And that's what I noticed when I speak.
That's interesting. That's a great observation. That's not something that I even noticed about myself.
Yeah, so I think if you look at your portfolio of investments, I think you'll find that is your whole thesis of how you're investing. And you, like you say, you probably don't realize it, but you invest only in your circle of competence. It's very rare. Only the only business, the businesses, the exception to the rule from what I've seen, and you tell me if I'm wrong, the horoscope business is a cash flow business, and that's why you invested in that. But everything else is all within your zone of genius.
Yeah. Very apt observation. I guess it's not something I realized. Nice.
Yeah, I do listen. I do listen, bro. I think it's great, but so that no one murders me on this podcast for this, you said you had a beautiful story about Richard Branson that you were going to tell us.
Yeah, so this was the story of how I got to interview Richard Branson, James Caan, and Alan Sugar in a single day. And so how that happened was when I was running Entrepreneur Express, there was this big business growth convention where all those three were speaking. And I realized that being able to interview these three people, putting it into my magazine would be a great lead story. However, I was a 17-year-old who had no business being backstage with BBC, Bloomberg, CNBC, and all those. And so I started thinking about what I could actually provide to the business convention. Is there something I could give? Because I didn't have any credibility. And I thought, well, what would he really want? Well, he wants to drive ticket sales, and he also wants to decrease costs, because that's obviously how they make their profits. So I then emailed him and I said, hey, I will come the day before and I will lay out all the chairs for the convention. And all I ask is that in return for that, I just want to press tickets. And I sent that, and within 20 minutes, I got a reply saying, okay, that takes a lot of heart to do. Cool, let's do it. So I remember the convention was on a Thursday, and I remember Wednesday I skipped school and I went there. It was in the Excel Arena, and I basically just like laid out all the chairs, and I was happy as a bunny because I knew the next day I'd be in a room with Branson and all of those guys. And then the next day, he honored Vishal, that's his name. He honored it, and I was in the back there with guys from BBC, CNBC, Bloomberg, blah blah. And actually, that picture of Branson was then the cover photo of the first magazine that we did. That's how I got into Branson.
I love that, because it just shows, and you've showed this continually through the podcast, that you don't need money to engineer opportunity. What you need is a vision and a story and a story to tell of why that's going to help them and also help you. So that's how you open doors. You open doors by telling stories and crafting narratives. That's how you open the door, and then you invest within your circle of competence, because that's what you know. And you design businesses so that they're sellable from day one, and you don't fall in love with the business itself. You fall in love with the art of business.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that, mate. And I like to ask this question because it allows the guest to really articulate the full lesson. So if you had to check out the world tomorrow, and you can't leave any of the businesses or anything else, but you could just leave one pearl of wisdom for this audience that will move them 1% forward in their life from today, what would that be for you?
The pearl of wisdom I would leave would be that you don't find yourself, you create yourself. That would be the pearl.
I love that. Do you want to expand on it? Because I love the statement, but I feel like you've done some deep thinking to get there, so I want to hear the deep thoughts that took you to that expression.
I think that as people living in the Western world, we tend to believe that there is a predestined version of who we are, and our job is to find our passion, find ourselves. And when I was younger, I thought that was the path. I had to find something that I was really good at and then do it. Whereas I think my life became significantly better when I said, I'm not really good at anything and I'm not really bad at anything. I can just, with enough effort and focus, I can design to be good at it. And so people often ask me whether I knew from young I wanted to be an entrepreneur, etc. People ask me this, and I go, well, no, I just thought, what version of myself do I have to be in order for me to get the outcome that I want? And I'm just going to be that person.
I love it. So you be it. Yeah, you just be who you design yourself to be.
Exactly.
And you craft your own narrative, and don't let anyone else tell you a story of what your narrative will be, especially when it retains from like the area that you came from. It would have been very easy for someone to tell you your story based upon the color of your skin and the area that you came from. So essentially you've transcended that, mate. Unbelievable scenes. I really appreciate this conversation, bro. I really appreciate the conversation.
Good.
And I loved your story. I hope I've done it justice. But guys, do me a solid favor. Subscribe to this podcast on every platform and share this podcast with a lot of other people, because there's so many golden nuggets in here. So many. And I want to get episode 2 out of you at some point in the future too, because there's a lot more questions I have to ask, but I'm conscious of our time and what we're doing here. But let's go. Guys, do me a solid favor. Drop a comment below this video and let us know who you want on the podcast next.